She didn't knock. She just claimed it. Like my land was hers to take. Red coat clipboard and a smile sharper than the wind. She called it a community snow bash. I called it what it was. Trespass in broad daylight. I told her, no, she laughed. Then came the flags, the flyers, the snowmobiles ripping through the trees my father planted. And just when she thought no one could stop her, I brought the law, the cameras, and the tow trucks. She thought she could erase my boundaries. What she didn't know was I was trained to hold the line, and this time the line was drawn in snow and I wasn't the one who slipped. I never imagined a simple blanket of snow could carry so much weight. When my father passed, he left me 5 acres just beyond the official edge of the Evergreen Hills HOA, a gentle pine-sheltered slope that cupped the rear of my property like a quiet protective hand. For years, hardly anyone noticed it existed. I preferred it that way. In summer, I cleared away the underbrush by hand and sewed narrow ribbons of wildflowers that bloomed in defiant color against the green. In winter, it became a vast unbroken sheet of white shimmering under moonlight, utterly still, peaceful, sacred, mine. My name is Samuel Travis. I spent 20 years as an Army captain, 2 deployments, countless nights under foreign skies, and more goodbyes than I care to count. When I finally came home, I chose this small town for one reason: solitude. I didn't return looking for arguments or neighborhood politics. I came to heal, to rebuild, to live quietly on the land my father had loved. 10 years ago, I bought the weathered house that bordered those acres. The porch sagged, the roof leaked in 3 places, and the chimney leaned like it was tired of standing. None of that mattered. I saw the strong bones beneath the wear. Over the following months, I restored it myself, new joists, fresh decking out back, every brick of the old fireplace laid again by my own calloused hands. From that deck, the view across the inherited acres was meant to be the reward for all of it, my forever vantage point, my private horizon. The boundary was never in question. I walked the line with a licensed surveyor, placed iron pins at every corner, and recorded the plat with the county. 3 years ago, when the HOA updated their community maps, they signed an official acknowledgement of the line. I kept the stamped copy in a fireproof box. I thought that settled it. I thought legal lines on paper still meant something. Then the snowmobiles arrived. It began subtly. One cold morning, while walking the far corner with a steaming mug of coffee, I noticed deep, jagged ruts slicing through the fresh powder, wide, aggressive tracks that looked like wounds across the smooth expanse. They tore straight through a cluster of young birches I'd nurtured for seasons. I stood there in the biting wind, boots sinking into the crust, staring at the violation, a slow anger kindling in my chest. At first, I told myself it was probably teenagers who'd lost their way in the dark. I added extra private property. No trespassing signs reinforced the old fence along the western edge with new posts, and tried to let it go. But 2 days later, I woke to the low predatory growl of engines echoing through the pines. Not one machine, 5 or 6, maybe more, roaring across the untouched snow that belonged to me. I threw on my coat, yanked on boots, and charged out the back door, but by the time I reached the tree line, they were already gone. Only swirling exhaust and churned up snow remained like the aftermath of a careless invasion. Fury rose sharp and hot. It wasn't just the intrusion. It was the careless destruction of something irreplaceable. I'd watched fragile places ruined before by carelessness, by entitlement, by people who decided someone else's boundaries didn't apply to them. I knew how these things escalated if you let them. That same afternoon, I drove to the polished HOA office at the entrance of the subdivision. The building gleamed with fresh paint, a digital marquee scrolling upcoming events, an American flag snapping smartly overhead. I asked to speak to someone about repeated trespassing. That's when I met her. Karen Bishop, vice president of the Evergreen Hills HOA board. Mid-50s, sharp bob haircut, red trench coat, even indoors clipboard, perpetually clutched like a shield. She sized me up with a thin, practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "I understand you have concerns," she said, voice syrupy, but edged with condescension. "There's been some confusion about that rear tract. It's undeveloped, and the community has historically enjoyed light recreational use. It's not community property," I interrupted, keeping my tone level. "I hold the deed. It lies outside your recorded boundary. She blinked, smile fixed in place. You may want to review the most recent plat maps again. We'll certainly look into it. That was the first shot fired. And I knew standing there, under the fluorescent lights of that pristine office, that this quiet patch of snow was about to become a battlefield. The intrusions didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. A week later, I found bright-colored flyers jammed into my mailbox, addressed to resident, not to me personally, but the message was impossible to miss. In bold festive lettering, Evergreen Hills, HOA presents The Winter Snow Bash, beneath the headline. A cheerful graphic of snowmobiles leaping over drifts, steaming cocoa mugs, and a roaring bonfire. At the bottom in capital letters, join us for races, treats, and family fun just behind Birchwood Trail. Birchwood Trail skirted the northern edge of my inherited acres. The arrow on the flyer pointed straight through my trees. I stood on the porch holding the paper, feeling the chill seep through my gloves. They weren't just crossing the line anymore. They were advertising it. Turning my father's quiet legacy into their seasonal playground without so much as a phone call or a knock on the door. They'd rebranded it community space, as if repeating the phrase often enough could erase a deed. That evening, I sat on the deck with a glass of bourbon watching moonlight spill silver across the torn-up snow. The ruts from the earlier rides had frozen into permanent scars, dark gashes against the pale expanse. A hard knot formed in my gut, not just anger, but something deeper. Betrayal, maybe. This wasn't random joyriding anymore. This was deliberate appropriation. I'd spent years holding lines in places most people couldn't pronounce, losing friends to ambushes, and politics far uglier than this. Yet somehow this felt more intimate, more personal. They were trying to steal the one place I'd come home to heal. 3 days after discovering the flyer, Karen Bishop arrived at my door. I'd just finished shoveling the back steps, breath still fogging in the frigid air, when I spotted the flash of red moving up my walkway. She wore the same trench coat, matching gloves, clipboard, tucked under one arm like a general's baton. Her boots crunched authoritatively over the path I'd cleared as though the ground already belonged to her. I opened the door but stayed in the threshold, making it clear she wasn't coming inside. "Good morning, Mr. Travis," she began, voice bright and rehearsed. "I wanted to stop by personally and clear up any misunderstanding about the upcoming winter bash." "There's no misunderstanding," I said. "Your event is planned on private property that doesn't belong to the HOA." Her smile held, but something flickered behind her eyes. "There's a bit of ambiguity about the rear tract near Birchwood. Historical community use suggests it falls under shared recreational jurisdiction." "No ambiguity exists," I cut in calm but firm. "I have the recorded deed, a recent survey, and your board's own signed acknowledgement from 3 years ago. The event you're promoting is on land you have no right to use." The temperature seemed to drop another degree. Karen adjusted her grip on the clipboard. "Let's not throw around inflammatory words like stolen, Mr. Travis. No one is erecting permanent structures. It's simply a day of wholesome winter fun on an undeveloped area that residents have enjoyed informally for years." "Informally doesn't equal legally," I replied. "And enjoyment doesn't grant ownership." She inhaled through her nose, the smile thinning. "With respect, you haven't maintained visible boundaries, no continuous fencing, no posted easements. To most neighbors, it appears as open space. The board is concerned that your objections are creating unnecessary division in our community." Division, as if the division wasn't her clipboard and her flyers. I met her gaze without blinking. "I don't need the board's concern. I need your machines, your volunteers, and your event off my property." The smile vanished entirely. "Are you threatening the association, Mr. Travis?" "No," I said quietly. "I'm informing you." She scribbled a quick note, the pen scratching loud in the cold silence. "We'll be reviewing this with our legal committee and consulting city records. I'd advise you to examine your own documents carefully. Sometimes residents confuse where individual rights end and community needs begin." She turned on her heel and marched back down the path, red coat stark against the snow. I closed the door harder than necessary. The house felt suddenly too quiet. My pulse hammered in my ears the way it used to before a night patrol, except this time the enemy wore fleece and carried event permits instead of rifles. I knew her type. I'd seen officers like her overseas smiling while they rewrote rules to suit their own convenience, daring anyone to challenge the new reality they'd declared. Karen wasn't confused. She was testing how far she could push before someone pushed back. And she was about to find out exactly how far a retired Army captain was willing to go to defend his own ground. The escalation came faster than I expected. 2 days after Karen's visit, I walked the western boundary and found bright orange survey stakes hammered into the frozen ground exactly along my recorded property line. Fluttering from each stake was a plastic flag, and nailed to one of the birches was a hand-lettered sign, "Winter Bash Setup Begins 122." The event was now less than a week away. My stomach tightened. They weren't just planning anymore. They were marking territory. I called the HOA office 3 times that day. No one picked up. I sent a detailed email with attached scans of the deed, the survey, and their own signed acknowledgement. Crickets. I even drove over in person, handed a thick envelope of copies to the receptionist, and watched her drop it into a tray without a glance. That night, I backed my truck to the edge of the tree line, aimed the headlights straight at their orange flags, and left the engine idling for an hour. A silent message: I'm here. I'm watching. Morning revealed the flags still standing defiant in the pale light. Fresh snowmobile tracks crisscrossed the field like mocking signatures. I spent the next 48 hours turning my quiet frustration into cold, methodical evidence. Snowshoes on, I walked every inch of the perimeter with my phone recording video, the stakes, the signs, the deep ruts, the snapped saplings. On the far western edge, I caught 2 teenagers on a single machine laughing as they carved donuts through the powder. I didn't shout. I simply held the camera, steady, capturing their faces, the machine's registration sticker, the way they crossed my fence line without hesitation. Proof, hard date stamped, geotagged proof. The morning after that footage, the damage looked even worse, under a fresh crust of ice. The packed trails had become a makeshift racecourse, 12 distinct tread patterns looping in figure eights, orange traffic cones placed at turns, even a small hand-painted arrow pointing toward the birch stand. Someone had spent serious time designing this. I photographed every cone, every broken branch, every bent sign. My fingers went numb inside gloves, but I didn't stop until I had hundreds of images and hours of video backed up on multiple drives. Then I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Myers, a calm, soft-spoken veteran with silver in his mustache, listened without interrupting as I laid it all out. I emailed him the files while we spoke. "I'll swing by tomorrow," he promised. But fair warning, Captain HOA disputes can turn into quicksand. They've got their own lawyers and rules. "This isn't an HOA dispute," I said. "This is criminal trespass and vandalism on deeded private property. Your jurisdiction." A pause. "Understood. We'll document it." That afternoon, I visited Caroline Shue, a sharp real estate attorney I'd worked with years earlier on a zoning matter. She scanned my folder, nodded slowly, and leaned back in her chair. "You've got an ironclad case," she said. "Ownership is crystal clear. But if they go ahead with the event and claim community use, delay works in their favor. Adverse possession arguments start creeping in." "Not on my watch," I replied. Caroline gave a wry smile. "Good, because Karen Bishop has a reputation for twisting facts in board meetings like a prosecutor. This won't stay polite." "I've handled worse," I told her. She laughed softly. "Then let's make sure you win." By the time I got home, a new spectacle greeted me across the road, a large vinyl banner stretched between 2 temporary posts, HOA logo gleaming in blue and silver. "Winter Bash Entrance," with a bold arrow aimed directly at the gap in my tree line. I pulled over, hauled the entire sawhorse setup into my truck bed, and filmed the whole thing. Trophy number 1. That evening, my security cameras caught movement. 3 figures emerged from the brush, flashlights, bobbing voices carrying on the wind. One of them was unmistakably Karen Redcoat Clipboard, directing the others as they paced distances between flags, laughing about perfect straightaways for the sprint lane. At one point, she turned, looked straight toward my house, and mimed waving a checkered flag. I froze the frame on her face, smug, triumphant, utterly convinced she'd already won. They left behind more cones and an unrolled banner that fluttered half buried in the snow. I retrieved it the next morning. In giant letters, "Snowmobile Sprint Lane. Sponsored by Evergreen Hills HOA. No permits, no permission, just raw, unapologetic entitlement." I posted a measured summary on the independent town forum, photos, videos, scans of the deed, a timeline of ignored complaints. Within hours, it spread. Some neighbors expressed shock and support. Others called me selfish, a grumpy recluse, hoarding unused land. One comment stung. "It's just snow. Let people have fun." Just snow. That night, someone smashed my mailbox, shoveled snow inside, and ripped down my fresh "no trespassing" signs, replacing them with childish scrawls. "Chill out, old man." I stood in the headlights, frost burning my lungs, and felt the old battlefield, calm, settle over me. They thought intimidation would make me fold. They had no idea what kind of fire they'd just poured gasoline on. The calm before the storm wasn't silence anymore. It was preparation. The countdown to the winter bash had shrunk to just 3 days, and the neighborhood was transforming into a garish winter wonderland that felt more like an occupation than a celebration. Colorful pennants fluttered from every lamppost leading into Evergreen Hills. Plastic snowflakes dangled overhead like cheap chandeliers. A massive banner spanned the cul-de-sac Winter Bash, Saturday 10 a.m. to dusk. Multiple smaller signs repeated the lie I couldn't ignore: open community snowfields behind Birchwood. Every arrow pointed straight at my inherited acres. I drove the route slowly, phone mounted on the dashboard, recording everything. Volunteers in matching HOA vests hammered stakes deeper, stacked crates of cocoa mix beside a circled fire pit and unloaded portable propane heaters. One trailer proudly bore the association's decal and carried a gleaming black snowmobile still wrapped in protective plastic. And there, orchestrating it all like a conductor in a red coat, stood Karen. Clipboard in hand, walkie-talkie crackling, issuing orders with crisp authority. She didn't glance my way as I passed, but I caught her reflection in a parked SUV's mirror, a fleeting, satisfied smirk. What pushed me over the edge was the sight of 2 teenagers wrestling bright red machines down a ramp and guiding them past my fence line straight into the pines that bordered my father's legacy. They high-fived each other while a cluster of adults watched approvingly. Karen was deploying children now to do the trespassing for her. I pulled over, stepped out, and filmed openly. No hiding, no sneaking. The camera swept from the entrance banner to the machines disappearing into my trees, then to the volunteers, and finally rested on Karen. Our eyes locked across the snow for several long seconds. She lifted her chin, defiant. I simply nodded once, got back in my truck, and drove home. Inside, I uploaded the new footage and fired it off to Deputy Myers, Caroline Shue, and the City Code Enforcement Office. Then I drafted a second, more pointed cease and desist, this one addressed personally to Karen Bishop. Notarized, dated, and attached to every damning photo and video I'd collected. That same afternoon, I walked into the county sheriff's substation, carrying a thick manila folder heavy with evidence. Deputy Ramirez took it, flipped through, and let out a low whistle. 10 minutes later, a sergeant confirmed they would open an official incident report. Clear ownership, documented violations, visible property damage. But he cautioned HOAs love to drag these into civil court. You might get faster results hitting them on the permit angle. Permit? That word lit up like a flare. I drove straight to City Hall. Marla, the clerk who'd helped me years earlier, pulled up the event database at my request. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, then stopped. Nothing, she said, brow furrowing. No application for a public gathering involving motorized vehicles, open flames, or amplified sound anywhere near Birchwood Trail. I leaned closer. You're certain? Absolutely. An event this size requires environmental review, noise variance, safety plan, the works. If they proceed, they're wide open for shutdown. She printed the search results, stamped them official, and handed them over. I walked out with the single most powerful weapon yet, proof the entire spectacle was illegal from the start. Back home that evening, I composed an email to every member of the HOA board, names and addresses pulled from public records. Subject line, stark white on black, immediate cease and desist, unauthorized trespass, and unpermitted event. The body was short, surgical. You are formally notified that the Winter Bash, scheduled for January 22nd, involves repeated trespass on privately owned Parcel 22B, for which the Evergreen Hills HOA holds no easement, right-of-way, or permission. Furthermore, no public event permit has been issued by the city. Continuation of planning, promotion, or execution will trigger immediate enforcement action through the Sheriff's Department, City Code compliance, and civil litigation. You have 24 hours to cancel the event, remove all signage and equipment, and issue a public retraction. I CC'd the sheriff's office code, enforcement, and Caroline. Then I hit send and waited. 3 hours later came the reply, not from Karen, but from the board secretary. A masterpiece of corporate vagueness. We appreciate your input and are reviewing all documentation. The board believes the Winter Bash aligns with long-standing community traditions and guidelines. We remain open to neighborly dialogue. Translation: we're ignoring you. I forwarded it to Caroline. Her response was 2 words: they're bluffing. The following day, I spent fortifying my position. I organized every photo-video map and email into labeled binders. I mounted a second trail camera, overlooking the main entry point they favored. Several times I parked my truck nose to nose with their banner engine, idling just long enough to remind them I hadn't gone anywhere. Deputy Myers called late afternoon. He'd visited the site again, banners still up, cones multiplied, one snowmobile, parked with its rear skis, clearly across my boundary, GPS coordinates indisputable. That's misdemeanor trespass right there, he said. Want us to tag it now? Hold off, I told him. Let them commit fully, then we end it in front of everyone. A soft chuckle on the line. Copy that, Captain. That night I sat on the darkened porch, cider steaming in my gloved hands, watching fresh snow sift down like a curtain, trying to hide their tracks. The wind moaned through the pines, carrying distant laughter from set-up volunteers. Tomorrow, they would throw their party, and I would be ready to shut it down for good. Friday dawned crisp and cloudless, the sky a hard metallic blue that made the snow glare like polished steel. The neighborhood had fully surrendered to the carnival atmosphere Karen had engineered. From dawn until dusk, vehicles streamed in pickups with enclosed trailers rattling chains, SUVs unloading folding tables, and stacks of orange safety vests. Strings of multicolored lights were draped between lampposts, even though the sun wouldn't set for hours. A portable sound system tested holiday music that drifted across the frozen air like an invasion of cheer. I watched it all from my kitchen window, coffee going cold in my hand. Every new arrival felt like another soldier crossing into hostile territory. Children in neon snowsuits chased each other around the welcome table that had been set up a mere 15 feet from my survey pin. Parents snapped photos in front of the giant Winter Bash archway someone had built overnight. And everywhere the signs, dozens of them, now proclaimed the same lie: open community snowfields, family fun, free admission. At around 5 o'clock came the knock I'd been expecting. It wasn't tentative. 2 sharp raps, followed by a third, measured confident the knock of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I opened the door to find Karen flanked by 2 other board members, Donna Greenfield, the treasurer with anxious eyes behind stylish glasses, and Mike Daly, the self-appointed events and culture chair, who always wore a perpetual salesman grin. All 3 sported matching Evergreen Hills jackets, embroidered logos, gleaming like uniforms. Karen didn't wait for an invitation. Samuel, she began using my first name as if we were confidants. We received your latest correspondence. We wanted to extend one final courtesy and give you a chance to reconsider your position. My position hasn't changed, I said, arms folded across my chest. Your event is illegal, and it's happening on my property. Karen's smile was thin-practiced. This isn't about ownership, Samuel. It's about unity, about giving families memories. You're not using that acreage for anything productive. You could be the hero here. Let the community enjoy one day of harmless fun, and we'll make sure your generosity is recognized. Harmless, I echoed. You mean the broken saplings, the compacted soil, the unauthorized motorized vehicles on private land? Mike jumped in, palms up in a placating gesture. Look, nobody's trying to take anything from you. Just let tomorrow happen. Afterward, we'll sit down and discuss compensation, maybe even fund some landscaping improvements. We're installing temporary lighting tonight. Your view will be spectacular. He waved a hand toward the tree line as though it were already part of their domain. I turned my gaze to Karen. Is that the board's final offer? Yes, she said, chin lifted. We've invested significant funds and volunteer hours. The neighborhood is counting on this. I reached inside the door, picked up the fresh cease and desist packet, now notarized with the city's no permit confirmation stapled on top, and handed it directly to her. You have until midnight to dismantle everything. If a single vehicle, person, or machine crosses my boundary tomorrow, I will pursue every remedy available: criminal trespass citations, property damage claims, personal liability, against board members, and full civil litigation. The sheriff is on standby. Code enforcement is copied. My attorney is ready. Karen's fingers tightened on the envelope, but her expression remained composed until the last sentence. Something flickered across her face, the first crack in the mask. "You're bluffing," she said quietly. "You wouldn't disrupt an entire community over snow. Try me." For the first time, no one spoke. Donna shifted uncomfortably. Mike's salesman smile faltered. Karen stared at me a beat longer, then turned without another word. The three of them walked back down my cleared path, boots crunching in unison, the red coat leading the retreat. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding harder than I cared to admit. That night, sleep refused to come. I paced the house in the dark, phone in hand, cycling through live feeds from the trail cameras. Every few minutes, headlights swept across the snow as late-night volunteers finished setup. Laughter carried on the wind. Someone tested a snowmobile engine. The roar echoed through the pines like a challenge. At 11:47 p.m., the HOA Facebook page posted a final hype. Graphic countdown clock, excited emojis, reminders to bring your sleds and your smiles, no cancellation, no retraction. Midnight passed. I stood on the porch one last time, breath fogging in the moonlight. Fresh powder had begun to fall again, soft, silent flakes drifting down as if the sky itself wanted to bury the evidence of what was coming. But I knew better. Tomorrow, they would throw open their gates and invite the neighborhood to trample everything I'd fought to protect. And tomorrow, I would stand in their way. I checked the charge on every camera battery, locked the house, and set my alarm for dawn. The calm before battle isn't empty. It's loaded, and mine was fully chambered. Saturday morning broke with a vengeance. Sunlight so bright, it bounced off the snow like shrapnel. The cold so sharp it sliced straight through any exposed skin. I stood at the kitchen window, black coffee steaming in one hand, watching the invasion unfold in real time. By 9:15, the road was clogged. Lines of SUVs and pickups idled bumper-to-bumper trailers rattling with snowmobiles still warm from overnight tuning. Parents unloaded kids in puffy, multicolored suits. Laughter and engine revs mingled in the air like a warped holiday soundtrack. Volunteers in neon safety vests directed traffic with exaggerated waves, guiding everyone toward the makeshift parking area just beyond my fence line. 15 feet from my corner pin, a folding table had become headquarters thermoses of cocoa stacks of liability waivers, a banner proclaiming "Welcome to the Winter Bash" in glittering letters. A portable speaker pumped upbeat music across the field. It looked like a county fair had been airdropped onto my backyard. I gave them until 9:45. Long enough for the crowd to swell, for excitement to peak, for every phone camera to be out and recording. Then I pulled on my heaviest coat, zipped it to the chin, grabbed the external hard drive, loaded with last night's trail cam footage, and walked straight into the heart of it. Heads turned as I crossed the snow. Conversations faltered. A few people recognized me, the quiet veteran at the end of the street, and the ripple spread. Smiles tightened. Children were tugged closer to parents. I kept my pace, steady, boots crunching with deliberate rhythm. Karen stood dead center at the painted start line, resplendent in HOA regalia, red scarf, knotted perfectly, walkie-talkie on her belt, clipboard raised like a conductor's baton. Volunteers flanked her, ready to wave the first racers off. I stopped 10 feet in front of her, close enough for the entire gathering to hear. "Karen," I said, voice carrying across the sudden hush, "you've ignored every legal notice, every warning, every opportunity to stop this. In about 5 minutes, you'll be committing mass criminal trespass on private property." Her eyes narrowed, but the practiced smile stayed glued in place. "Mr. Travis, this is a community celebration. We're not here for conflict. If you have a formal complaint—" "I've filed them," I cut in. "With the sheriff, with code enforcement, with my attorney. You're on notice, all of you." I turned slowly, addressing the crowd directly. "Everyone listening, you are currently gathered on private land. This event has no city permit. Every snowmobile that crosses that tree line," I pointed to the orange survey flags 20 feet behind me, "will be documented, reported, and subject to towing and citation. The choice is yours." A ripple of unease moved through the families. A mother clutched her toddler tighter. A teenage boy in a full-face helmet glanced nervously at his father. Someone near the cocoa table whispered, "Is he serious?" Karen stepped forward, voice pitched loud for the audience. "Please ignore the disruption, everyone. We're here for winter fun. This is a simple boundary disagreement, nothing more. I held up the hard drive like evidence in court. This contains video from last night, your volunteers unloading machines onto my property, placing signs measuring race lanes. If even one sled crosses my line today, this footage goes straight to the sheriff, along with GPS coordinates, timestamps, and sworn statements from witnesses. Leave the event area immediately, Karen hissed, smile finally cracking. You're harassing families. No, I replied calm and clear. You're breaking the law. And today you're going to face the consequences you were warned about. Mike Daly materialized beside her hands, up in his usual peacemaker pose. Travis, come on, man. Let's talk privately. You're making everyone uncomfortable. It should be uncomfortable, I said. That's what happens when you steal someone else's land for your party. Murmurs grew louder. Phones rose higher. A father quietly began reloading his trailer. Another volunteer slipped off her neon vest and edged toward the road. Karen saw the tide shifting. She raised her voice again, almost shrill. Everyone please, stay calm and enjoy the day. No need to let one person's grievance ruin our community spirit. I let out a short, humorless laugh. Community spirit doesn't include trespass vandalism and lying on public flyers. This isn't a grievance, it's ownership. And then the sirens cut through the crisp air, distant at first, then swelling fast a rising wail that silenced every engine and every voice. Karen froze mid-gesture. All heads swiveled toward the main road. Blue and white lights flashed between the trees, growing brighter closer. Tires crunched over packed snow as 3 full-size tow trucks rounded the corner in formation, followed by 2 sheriff's SUVs, roof bars, strobing across the stunned crowd. The music died with an electronic squeak. I stepped aside, crossed my arms, and waited for the reckoning to arrive. The tow trucks rolled to a stop along my fence line, with the slow, deliberate authority of a military convoy. Engines rumbled low winches, already uncoiling like steel serpents. The flashing blue and white lights painted the snow in rhythmic pulses, turning the festive scene into something surreal and suddenly very serious. Deputy Myers stepped out first, hat tipped against the glare, and walked straight to me. "Morning, Mr. Travis," he said quietly, voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd waited patiently for the right moment. Then he turned to the frozen crowd and raised his voice. "Folks, this gathering is on private property, without owner consent, and without required city permits. The event is hereby shut down. All snowmobiles and equipment on or beyond this boundary are subject to impound." Karen's face drained of color so fast I thought she might sway. "You can't. This is a community event. We have families here." Ma'am Myers replied evenly. "You're on land clearly deeded to Mr. Samuel Travis. We've verified plat surveys and satellite overlays. You were served multiple notices. This stops now." He nodded to the tow operators, 3 burly drivers in heavy Carhartts who moved with practiced efficiency. Chains clinked, hooks dropped. The first machine, a gleaming red Polaris, that I recognized as Karen's personal pride and joy, was lifted onto a flatbed as easily as a toy. The crowd fractured. Parents scooped up children. Engines that had been warming for races now coughed to life in retreat. A teenage boy tried to jump on his sled and gun it away, only to be waved down by his mortified father. One mother burst into tears not from sadness, but from sheer embarrassment as she hustled her kids toward their SUV. Karen lunged forward, clipboard forgotten on the snow. "This is outrageous. Those are private vehicles. You need warrants." "No, ma'am," Myers said, handing her a printed violation notice. "Unpermitted event on private property plus trespass. Owners can retrieve their machines from county impound after paying storage and citation fees." Another truck backed up to a cluster of 3 machines parked just inside my tree line. The winch whirred cables tightening, and the sleds rose one by one, skis dangling helplessly. Spectators who moments ago had been cheering now filmed in stunned silence, phones shaking in cold hands. Donna Greenfield stood off to the side, tears freezing on her cheeks, clutching her coat closed as if the wind had suddenly turned hostile. Mike Daly had already retreated to his truck, head down, pretending to take an urgent call. Karen spun toward me as her Polaris was secured with straps, its shiny body reflecting the flashing lights like a humiliated trophy. "You did this," she screamed, voice cracking across the field. "You ruined everything. All this over unused snow." I met her eyes without flinching. "No, Karen," I said loud enough for the nearest onlookers to hear. "You did this." You ignored warnings, lied to your neighbors, and thought rules didn't apply to you. This is what happens when you trespass on a man's home. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. For the first time since I'd met her, Karen Bishop was speechless. The last Snowmobile, a child-sized one that had been meant for the junior races, was loaded with almost gentle care. The driver gave me a small nod, professional and neutral, before climbing back into his cab. Within 20 minutes, the field was nearly empty. Abandoned cocoa cups steamed faintly in the cold. Forgotten cones lay scattered like surrendered soldiers. The only sounds were the low idle of tow trucks pulling away and the crunch of retreating tires on packed snow. I stood alone in the sudden quiet breath, fogging slowly, watching the convoy disappear down the road with its cargo of seized machines. The wind picked up swirling loose powder across the ruined tracks. For the first time in weeks, the expanse felt like it was breathing again, wounded, scarred, but no longer under siege. I turned and walked back toward my house boots, leaving the only fresh prints in the snow. Behind me, the echo of chains and engines faded into the pines. And in front of me, for the first time since this started, lay nothing but open, reclaimed silence. The tow trucks had barely vanished down the road when the digital fallout began. By early afternoon, shaky phone videos flooded every local Facebook group and neighborhood app. One clip filmed by a teenager who'd been live streaming the epic races captured the entire collapse, cheerful music in the background, kids cheering, then the sudden wail of sirens, the stunned silence, and finally, Karen's raw scream as her cherry-red Polaris was winched away. The girl's caption was brutally simple: HOA Winter Bash got raided. They took all the snowmobiles, on the wrong land. Oops. Within hours, the video racked up thousands of view shares, spilling beyond Evergreen Hills into surrounding towns. Comments ranged from stunned laughter to outright outrage at the HOA's arrogance. A few defended Karen, calling it overreach, but most simply marveled at how far entitlement could stretch. Karen's own social media went dark. Her snowmobile sat impounded, and rumors swirled that she'd driven to the county lot in a fury, demanding immediate release, only to be turned away with a stack of citation paperwork. That same evening, Caroline emailed me. Travis, Sheriff and Code Enforcement, have confirmed multiple violations. You're clear to file civil claims not just against the association, but against individual board members who personally directed trespass and setup. Karen's exposure is significant. Meet Monday. We can discuss damages, injunctions, and possibly punitive relief. See, I read it twice, then set the phone down. I hadn't started this wanting money or headlines. I'd only wanted my boundary respected. But seeing how willingly the board had gambled with someone else's property, and how quickly they'd throw neighbors under the bus for their fun, changed the equation. Consequences needed to stick. Monday morning, I sat in Caroline's office with my now bulging enforcement binder. She'd already drafted the complaint counts of criminal trespass, vandalism, environmental negligence, misuse of HOA funds, even defamation for the public communications that repeatedly questioned my ownership. We file this, she said, sliding the pages across, and the board will fracture. They'll either settle fast or sacrifice Karen to save themselves. Do it, I said. The lawsuit was filed Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday, the cracks were visible. 2 board members quietly resigned, citing personal reasons. Volunteers who'd worn neon vests on Saturday suddenly had scheduling conflicts for every upcoming cleanup. The HOA's Facebook page disabled comments after a flood of questions demanding transparency. Friday night, the emergency meeting notice went up on every community board and mailbox, bold red letters, announcing a special session all members strongly encouraged to attend. I didn't go. I didn't need to. Saturday morning, Donna Greenfield appeared on my porch, scarf pulled tight against the wind, hands trembling around a paper cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She's gone, Donna said without preamble. Karen. The vote was 5-2 to remove her as vice president and from all committees. Effective immediately. I leaned against the doorframe. Should have happened before you staked my land for a racetrack. Donna's eyes glistened. We didn't think it would go this far. She kept saying the maps were ambiguous, that informal use over years gave us rights. A lot of us just went along. You went along with trespass and vandalism, I said. You knew whose land it was. You chose convenience. She looked down at the porch boards. I know, I'm sorry. We all are. Some more than others. Silence stretched between us, cold and heavy. Finally, she met my eyes again. She's threatening to sue the board, now says we abandoned her. But most of us have kids' mortgages. We didn't sign up for this. I nodded once. Then maybe next time you'll verify facts before you invade someone's property. Donna turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, thank you for stopping it. I didn't realize how wrong it was until I watched those trucks take everything away. She walked back down the path, shoulders hunched against more than just the weather. Inside, I closed the door and added her visit to the timeline in my binder. The HOA had wanted a war over snow. They'd gotten a mirror held up to their own behavior, and they didn't like what they saw. The reckoning was only beginning. The weeks that followed the raid felt like the slow unraveling of a tightly wound knot. Evergreen Hills didn't return to its old rhythm overnight. Instead, it fractured and reformed in subtle, visible ways. Karen's snowmobile remained locked in the county impound lot until she paid the full $3,000 fine, plus late fees and storage charges. She appealed the citation lost and reportedly threw a scene at the clerk's office that earned her an additional disorderly conduct warning. The story spread through town like wildfire, each retelling more humiliating than the last. The HOA's damage control kicked into high gear. A formal letter arrived in my mailbox on Tuesday, printed on official letterhead, the tone stiff and carefully worded. Mr. Samuel Travis, the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association, acknowledges your legal ownership of Parcel 22B44 and regrets the unauthorized use of said property during the January 22nd event. We are committed to strict compliance with all municipal codes, property laws, and neighborly boundaries moving forward. This letter serves as formal recognition of your property rights. Sincerely, the Board of Directors. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the closest they'd ever come to admitting fault. I filed it in the binder beside the cease and desist orders, and the county's no permit confirmation, then sent a scanned copy to Caroline. Her reply, they're folding, hard. Karen, however, wasn't folding quietly. Local gossip painted her as increasingly isolated, threatening lawsuits against the board for defamation and abandonment, posting cryptic passive-aggressive rants on her now private Facebook profile about certain individuals weaponizing the system against community spirit. None of it landed. The neighborhood had moved on, or at least tried to. The next monthly board meeting drew a crowd that spilled out of the clubhouse, over 50 residents packed shoulder to shoulder. Caroline and I watched the live stream from her office. The room was electric with tension. One man stood and demanded, "You knew it wasn't public land. Why did you let her push this through?" The treasurer resigned on the spot, tears in her eyes as she left the room. Two others followed her out before the meeting ended. Thomas Keener, the HOA president, who'd stayed mostly silent during the saga, finally spoke. He admitted the board had received my warnings weeks in advance. He admitted they should have verified ownership more thoroughly, but had relied on past informal use. The phrase hung in the air like an excuse no one believed anymore. Caroline filed an injunction request the following week, a legal block preventing any future claims of prescriptive easement through continued use. That final loophole was sealed. My acres were mine irrevocably. 3 days later, a county compliance officer knocked on my door with a thick envelope addressed to the Evergreen Hills HOA. Inside, a formal cease order forbidding any future use claim or alteration of my property without a notarized agreement signed by me personally. The officer waited while I signed the receipt, then tipped his hat and left. I stood in the doorway, envelope in hand, feeling the weight of finality settle over me like fresh snow. That afternoon, I drove past the clubhouse. The banners were gone. The bulletin board had been scrubbed clean now, showing only mundane notices about mailbox painting and snow removal schedules. Karen's name had vanished from every placard, every committee list. It was as if she'd been erased. But the neighbors remembered. As I passed, some waved awkwardly, but sincerely. Others nodded without meeting my eyes. A few, the loudest cheerleaders from before, simply watched in silence, perhaps finally understanding they'd backed the wrong side. 2 months later, Karen's house went on the market. The for sale sign appeared one morning, listing price $30,000, below market value. The realtor had to disclose the ongoing legal matters in the paperwork. No farewell party, no goodbye note. Just a quiet departure, the moving truck gone before most people noticed. Evergreen hills grew quieter. Snow fell, melted, fell again. No new signs appeared. No engines roared across my tree line. No children darted through the birches. The neighborhood had learned a hard lesson: ownership still meant something, and consequences still followed when you ignored it. I didn't need their apologies. I had the deed, the law, and the silence I'd fought to reclaim. And that silence was sweeter than any victory speech. Spring arrived gently that year, as if the land itself needed time to forgive the wounds of winter. I remember the first morning I stepped outside and saw no footprints cutting across the melting snow, no tire ruts, no orange flags, no scattered cones. Just the quiet drip of icicles from the eaves and the soft creak of branches shaking off their heavy white burden. The silence felt brand new, earned rather than assumed. I walked the full perimeter that day, not to check cameras or collect evidence, but simply to listen. The birches whispered in the breeze. A pair of robins hopped along the fence line, unafraid. The expanse behind my house no longer felt like a contested border. It felt like home again. Some of the saplings hadn't survived. The trampling thin trunks snapped at the base roots, exposed and frozen. But others pushed stubborn green buds toward the sun. I knelt beside them, brushed away the last crust of snow, and planted 5 more seedlings, one for every week I'd spent defending this place, one for every ignored warning, one for every voice that had urged me to just let it go. As I pressed soil around the tender roots with bare, cold fingers, a deep sense of vindication settled in my chest, the kind I hadn't felt since hanging up my uniform for the last time. The lawsuit wrapped up quietly in early summer. Caroline negotiated a settlement that covered the damaged trees' legal fees and a modest sum for environmental restoration. The HOA, under new leadership, desperate to close the chapter, signed quickly. I donated most of the money to the local Veterans of Foreign Wars post and a native reforestation project upstate. What mattered most wasn't the check. It was the single page filed permanently with the county recorder, a declaration signed by the entire board, including a reluctant, handwritten acknowledgement from Karen herself, stating unequivocally that Parcel 22B44 belonged to Samuel Travis and had been used without permission on January 22nd. I had that page framed and hung in my office, not as a trophy but as a reminder. People forget. Boards turn over. New residents move in. Someone else might one day appear in a bright coat with a clipboard and a smile, convinced that community means whatever they decide it should mean. When that day comes, I'll still have the truth in black and white. Later that summer, I did something I never had expected. I invited a few neighbors over. Not the whole subdivision, just the ones who had quietly supported me when the noise was loudest. Roger from 3 doors down brought burgers. Elaine arrived with homemade potato salad. Lisa, the young mother who'd once defended Karen online, showed up with her kids and a flat of annual flowers to plant along my back fence. We grilled on the deck, drank cold beer as the sun dipped behind the pines, and watched fireflies blink across the open field. No one mentioned Karen. No one needed to. At one point, Lisa's 7-year-old son pointed toward the acres stretching out behind us and asked, "Is this where all the snowmobiles got taken away?" His mother tensed, but I just smiled. "Yeah, buddy, right out there." He considered that for a moment, eyes wide. "You stopped them, didn't you?" I reminded them whose land it was, I said. He nodded solemnly, satisfied. When everyone had gone home, and the embers in the fire pit glowed low, I sat alone on the porch, listening to crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The breeze carried the scent of warm pine and fresh earth, and in that quiet moment, the full weight of it settled over me. This fight had never been just about property lines or snow. It had been about voice, about refusing to surrender something irreplaceable, simply because someone louder or more organized or more entitled demanded it. It was about dignity, about memory, about the legacy my father left me in 5 quiet acres that curled like a protective hand around everything I'd come home to rebuild. For a brief, ugly season, someone had tried to overwrite that story with banners, engines, and lies. But I held the pen, and I wrote the ending they never saw coming. People sometimes ask if I worry another Karen will appear someday, clipboard in hand, ready to test the next boundary. I just smile, because they still don't understand what really happened here. They think I fought an HOA. But what I did was far simpler and far more powerful. I stood on ground that was mine, ground my father entrusted to me, and I refused to move. In the end, that was enough. The land healed, the neighborhood learned, and the silence I'd come home for returned deeper, stronger, and forever mine.